Hello, my friend, and welcome back to another lesson. In this presentation, I'm going to be introducing you to the basic theory that governs the PineScript language. So, first things first, what is PineScript? PineScript is TradingView's custom scripting language designed specifically for analyzing market data and nothing else. It is not designed to do anything except be efficient and optimal at analyzing price data and market information. That means that it is a very basic language, which is a good thing for us as traders because we're not interested in building out complex systems or applications. We just want to analyze price, generate alerts, and use code, leverage code to stay on top of the markets and be more effective at our job as traders, which is to extract profits out of the markets. So we don't need anything super complex. We just want a basic language. That's the beautiful thing about PineScript. We'll also cover the drawbacks of the fact that it is a very basic language later on in this presentation. But the core thing to take away from this is that if you're learning PineScript, I would imagine you're probably familiar with MQL, the programming language behind MetaTrader. If you're not familiar with MQL, MQL is basically the equivalent of PineScript for the MetaTrader charting platform. The main difference between the two is that PineScript is far simpler than MQL. MQL is a slightly higher level programming language. It has a bit more power in its functionality. For example, you can read and write to and from files in MQL, so you can create files on the computer and write to them or read from them. You can't do that sort of thing in PineScript because it's a cloud-based language. So the main advantage of PineScript, which we'll cover later on, is that it's cloud-based, it's simple, it runs on the TradingView servers, compared to something like MQL, which needs to run on the MetaTrader platform, which means you need to leave MetaTrader running on your computer in order for it to execute its code. PineScript, however, is not like that. So PineScript is designed primarily for creating indicators and alerts. That's its main purpose and what it is best at. However, it can also be used to automate your strategy backtesting and in some cases even strategy execution. So its main purpose is really to help us stay on top of the markets. It's for analyzing price data, generating alerts or signals on our chart. It was not designed initially to be used to create and test strategies. It can now do that. Over the years, the TradingView team have evolved PineScript to be able to automate strategy backtesting, but I would not say it is the best language out there for this sort of thing. We'll cover the pros and cons of PineScript strategies later in the course when we get to the strategy section of the course, but just know that its main strength, the main strength of PineScript, is to create indicators and alerts. So it is not designed for automated trading directly. That feature, that functionality does not exist inherently within the core code of PineScript, but it can still be achieved. You can still automate trading strategies through PineScript. It's just a little bit tricky. You need to use third-party APIs, which means you need to trigger alerts in your code that sends information to a third party, which then executes commands on your trading account based on the information that you send it through your TradingView alerts. So that's a very advanced subject. That is probably the most advanced subject relating to PineScript. So we will cover that towards the end of the course once we've established a core foundational understanding and proficiency with this programming language, which we will achieve by the end of this course. I'm going to show you many examples, practical examples of how to write useful code that can be used to analyze the markets and generate trading alerts, signals. And once we fully understand how PineScript works in that domain, then we will be in a position to experiment with automation. I currently have a script, or I have two scripts actually, that are currently running on the TradingView platform, auto trading through MetaTrader, and it has been profitable for the past few months. So it is possible to automate your trading through PineScript, but it's tricky. There are some pros and cons and drawbacks you need to be aware of. We'll cover that much later in the course. I just want to make you aware of that up front because I know a lot of you are very interested in trade automation. Just know that it's possible, it's tricky, and you will need to know PineScript quite intimately before we get to that subject later on in the course. Anyway, moving on, PineScript is a cloud-based language, which means it runs on TradingView's server. Your code runs on the TradingView server, but it draws its information onto the client, which is your computer and your browser. So when you save your script and execute your code, it is run on the TradingView servers, not in your browser, but it does draw on your browser, and any alerts that you trigger in your code will be triggered on TradingView servers and then sent to your browser or your phone or your email, however you set up your alerts. This means that once you've set up your code and added your indicators or scripts to your chart and set them up, set up your alerts and so on, you can turn off your computer and your script will still continue to run. So moving on, how does PineScript actually work? Well, unlike most languages, Pine runs in what is called an infinite loop. This means that it is continuously executing. In most other languages, this is not the default behavior of your code. Most languages will run your script once, unless you explicitly tell it to repeat itself. In PineScript, we don't need to do that. It actually just runs in an infinite loop. But the way that it works is when you add a script to your chart, your script code is executed on the close of each historical bar. So your script will run from the very first bar on your chart all the way up to the one before the currently active bar, and it will process its data based on the information that that candle contains on its closing price. So it does not simulate the movement of the candle. The only thing your script code can know about historical price action is what its high was, what its low was, what its open was, and what its close was. And so your script code will execute based on that information. And then once it reaches the currently active bar, so the real-time bar on your chart, the current bar that hasn't yet closed and become a historical bar, then your code is executed on each change in price or volume. In other words, each tick. So whenever your candle moves on your chart or volume changes, and sometimes volume can change and price doesn't change, your script code will be executed if either of those things happen on the real-time bar. All of this is done on TradingView's servers. So as I mentioned earlier, your Pine code is executed on the TradingView server, not your browser. And then any drawing functions or alerts or any outputs that your script generates are drawn or executed onto your browser's chart. So as I said earlier, you don't need to leave your computer running, you don't need to leave your charts open. Once your code is added to your chart, if you have set up any alerts, all of that will be handled on the TradingView servers in the cloud. Now, there are 3 different unique types of scripts that we can create in PineScript. We have indicator scripts, we have strategy scripts, and we have library. I'll be covering all of these in their own sections throughout the course. The most commonly used type will be the indicator type. The strategy type can be used for automated backtesting, but you will need to have a thorough understanding of how indicators work before you will be able to effectively write a strategy script. So we will start focused on indicators in this course, and we'll progress to probably libraries next, and then strategies. So a library script is different to both indicator and strategy scripts. It is basically what it sounds like. It's a library. So if you think of a real life library that contains books that people can borrow, a library script is the same idea. It's a script that you write once, and all of the code in that library script can be borrowed by other scripts, including other library scripts. So for example, I have a script called my Zen library script where I put in all of the functions that I commonly use. So any code that I use in many of my scripts, for example, candlestick pattern detection code, stop loss calculation code, things that I do in my scripts that don't change from script to script. So I basically copy and paste the code into all of my scripts. I have now moved all of that code that I frequently reuse into a single library script, and every script that I write that needs access to that code, I can import that library into my code, into my indicators, into my strategies, even into other libraries, and I can reference that code. So we'll cover all of these later in the course, but those are the 3 main types we have to work with in PineScript. So our scripts are created using inbuilt functions and variables available to us in PineScript. So the TradingView team have created a wealth of inbuilt functions and variables that we can reference in our scripts. For example, if you want to get the current ATR, the current average true range of a candle, normally you would have to do this. You would have to execute this formula in your code to get that ATR value. But in PineScript, we have access to these inbuilt functions that do this for us. So if you want to get the ATR in PineScript, it's as simple as this. We just need to request the value of the inbuilt ATR function. That's what's powerful about PineScript. This applies to everything: RSI, stochastics, volume, moving averages, volume weighted, average price, you name it. If it can be done on your charts, PineScript likely have an inbuilt function for it, or the capabilities to write the function yourself are there. So moving on, what is an indicator script? I already went over this briefly, but let's go into more detail. An indicator script is a standard PineScript type designed for creating indicators and alerts. So by indicators, I mean things like something that analyzes price data like an oscillator, so like an RSI indicator or a moving average. We can create our own versions of these indicators by combining them into a single indicator. I have several scripts that work with several indicators and combine them all to create tools to analyze price data, which then notify me of profitable trading setups with an edge over the markets. That's the main purpose of indicator scripts, at least custom built scripts. So you can create indicators of any kind. You could create your own proprietary indicators, for example. I mean, someone had to invent the RSI, which we all now are familiar with and use in our scripts. If you are mathematically inclined and talented, you can probably make any indicator script idea in your head into a reality using PineScript. And so anyway, indicator scripts are more used for their alert functionality. So strategy scripts can technically generate alerts, but they don't have as much alert functionality as indicator scripts. So if you want to generate alerts to assist in your trading process, you will most likely be working with an indicator script. And indicator scripts share all the same inbuilt functions and variables as strategy scripts. So the two types have access to all of the same functions except for a handful of exceptions. For example, your indicator scripts cannot use any of the strategy commands. So you can't enter and exit trades. You don't have access to that code base in your indicator scripts. Basically, a strategy can do anything an indicator can do except for generating certain types of alerts, and an indicator can do anything a strategy can do except for managing strategy commands. As I said earlier, we will be working with indicator script types the most in this course, especially in the beginning. So you will become very familiar with this type of script by the end of the course. Moving on, what is a strategy script? A strategy script is a specialized PineScript type designed for backtesting our strategies in the tester system. So here's an example of that. Now, there are some limitations with the strategy tester, especially if you're a Forex trader. We'll cover the limitations, the risks and dangers you need to be aware of in the strategy section of this course. But even though certain strategies do not perform well with the TradingView strategy tester system, they can still be quite useful, and I use them frequently in my own trading process. Now, strategy scripts, as I mentioned earlier, do not have access to a handful of indicator functions. Specifically, they have limited alert functionality compared to indicators. We'll cover that in future lessons. It's not really an issue, but it's something you need to be aware of if you're dealing with script alerts. For the most part, you are better off using indicators for alert-based scripts than strategies, but we'll cover that in more detail when we get to the strategy section of the course. So a strategy script has access to the strategy namespace or library of functions, and these strategy commands are used for placing and managing mock trades. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. If you type strategy.control space or command space on a Mac into the Pine editor, we get a full list of all of the functions available to us when working with a strategy script. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be working with this type of script in the advanced section of the mastery course. So we won't be covering strategy scripts until we are very familiar with indicator scripts, because you can't write a good strategy if you can't write a good indicator. Now, what is a library script? I've already mentioned briefly what this is, but basically it is a unique type of script which is used to share code between scripts. So a library script can be imported into indicator scripts, strategies, and even other libraries. It can also be published publicly or privately, but it cannot be imported into public scripts if it's published as private. So what I mean by that is, if you write a library of code and you publish it privately so that no one else can see the code, but they can still use it, then they cannot import your private library into a script that they want to publish as public. So in other words, you can't use hidden library code in a public script. But if you publish your library publicly, you can use it in any script. And by publicly, I mean open source, so that everyone can read your source code. We'll cover how you publish your scripts later on in the course. But as I said, if your library is public, then anyone on TradingView can import your library and can read your code. Now, library scripts have several limitations compared to indicator and strategy scripts because they are designed specifically to be shared across all types of scripts. So there are certain things you cannot do with a library script that you can do with an indicator or strategy script. But we will cover this type of script in much more detail later on in the course. So moving on, what are PineScript's limitations? There are a few. We need to address them so that we are all on the same page and we all understand exactly what we're in for when it comes to learning Pine. First of all, PineScript is extremely simple, which means there is no framework for building complex applications. You're not going to be building games or phone apps or anything like that with PineScript. It's not possible. It also does not have high-end functionality, meaning it cannot access files and it cannot read websites and that sort of thing like language like Python or MQL or Java can. Now, there are ways to retrieve certain types of data in PineScript relevant to trading. So for example, you can get company financials, you can get sentiment data, you can get things like how much oil supply is in the market and what interest rates are and things like that using certain functions in PineScript, such as Quandl, which is a third-party data service that PineScript have integrated with. You can do some really interesting stuff with that service, but you cannot directly read websites from within PineScript or read and write to files or access databases or anything like that. There are also some computational resource limitations on the server side. And by that, I mean like memory restrictions, RAM restrictions. The reason for this is that our scripts run on shared servers. So when I write a script and add it to my chart, the same server or the same network of servers runs my script just as it runs your script. So we are all using shared infrastructure when we're using Pine. Now that's generally not a problem for performance. All of our scripts run pretty quickly on the TradingView servers. They're doing a great job of managing their resources and keeping scripts running. I've never had a script fail to run or fail to trigger an alert or anything like that due to server-side issues, but there are some resource limitations in our scripts. For example, there is a limit to how many candles you can reference in your script. It's quite a high limit depending on the time frame you're on. For example, on the daily chart, you can access decades of data, but on a 1-minute chart, you can only access a few days of data at a time because there are thousands of candles per week. And so that can be a problem on lower time frames, but we'll get to that later on in the course. There are some ways to get around part of these limitations, but these are still issues that you need to be aware of. There is also a limit to how much data you can request from other markets or time frames. So for example, if you're working on a crypto script, it's not possible to make your script reference every top 100 coin on the market. I can't remember the limit. We'll cover that in a future lesson when we get to requesting other timeframes and other markets, but I think the limit is around 20 or 30 markets per script and timeframes. But it's not often that you would ever need to access that many markets. I've never written a script that needed to access more than a couple of markets at a time. So this isn't a huge deal in terms of limitations, but it is something we need to be aware of. Next, there is also a limit to how much time a script can take to execute. I've never run into this issue, and I've written some pretty long scripts. I have a script that is nearly 1,000 lines of code that takes a while to run, but has never failed to run. So again, I'm not sure what the actual limit is. I think they change it based on the resources that are required to keep the servers running, but it's quite a long time. Probably longer than 10 or 20 seconds. I don't think I've ever had a script take longer than that to execute, but that's something to be aware of as well. Basically, this means you need to make sure your scripts are efficient, especially if your script is very complex. If you write an extremely complex script with hundreds of lines of code, you need to make sure that you've written your code efficiently so that it's not doing anything that takes too long to execute. For example, we can work with loops in PineScript, so you can loop your script any number of times before it executes its output. If you mess up your code with your loop so that it takes too long to run, your script may not actually run on your charts. So we'll explore that limitation in future lessons. Next, there is a limit to how much computer memory or RAM your scripts can use. So if you use a lot of data types in your script, you could run into this issue. I've never run into this issue. In fact, I've never run into any of these issues that I'm mentioning here, except for the candle limitation and how many candles I can access. That has been a problem in some of my scripts, but I've never run into any of these other issues, so you shouldn't need to worry about them, but these are inherent limitations of the language that I need to cover. Finally, the final limitation that is impossible to work around in PineScript is how long your script's source code can be. Again, I'm not sure what the limit is. I've never encountered it. The longest script I've ever written is around 1,000 lines of code. I would assume that the limit is quite high. So those are the main limitations of PineScript. Let's move on to the main advantages of PineScript. So as I said in the previous slide, one of the biggest disadvantages of PineScript is its simplicity, but that is also one of its biggest advantages. It's extremely simple and very nimble, meaning it's very easy to learn and it's very fast to create scripts. There have been times when I had an idea pop into my head, a trading idea, an indicator idea, and I've jumped on my computer and written code that executes on that idea within a matter of minutes. Some of my best indicators actually came to be through this process of just impulsive ideas. And because it's so easy to write the code, it's a joy to write in PineScript. Even complex scripts do not take very long to write. In the past, I used to do client work. I would write code for clients. I had to charge a upfront deposit for my work because I rarely took longer than an hour to write the entire script for some people. Obviously, there'd be some back and forth, and maybe I'd spend 2 or 3 hours in total working on the script. But if I charged an hourly rate, it wasn't worth my time. So I had to charge a higher upfront deposit fee to make it worth my time as a trader to write that code, because obviously I make a decent living now from my own trading and investing. So I didn't need the money from coding jobs. And the fact that it didn't take very long to do meant that I was getting a lot of requests from people, and eventually I had to stop taking them. So obviously, depending on the complexity of the job, it's extremely simple to write Pinecode. It's very rare that you run into a challenge that isn't easy to write code for. The most time-consuming process you will probably find in PineScript, at least this is what I've found, is that it takes more time to solve the problem in your head using logic and creative thinking to work out a solution to the challenge than it does to actually code that solution. The next main advantage of PineScript is that it is very, very well maintained and frequently improved upon and updated, which sucks for me because it means I spend a massive amount of my time learning new features of PineScript that I don't even use in my scripts, just so that I can teach them to you guys who are interested in those new features. So it's a little bit annoying for me. I'm constantly being forced to update old scripts and learn new ideas and spend time reading the documentation, learning new features of PineScript, but that's great for you guys and the trading community in general. And I'm saying this a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It's also great for me because as a Pinecoder, I use PineScript a lot in my trading process, obviously, or I wouldn't be here teaching this stuff. And so over the years, I've seen some amazing improvements come into PineScript. And so this is a huge advantage of the language. I've never seen a programming language, at least in the trading technology community, that is as frequently updated and improved upon as PineScript is. It's a really exciting language to learn, and you picked a great time to learn it because as of the recent release of PineScript 5, it seems like there are some big improvements on the horizon for this language. The next main advantage of PineScript is the fact that it's based on TradingView. And TradingView have the best support team I've ever had the pleasure of dealing with in the trading industry. I wish more brokers had support teams as excellent as TradingView. The TradingView support team will answer any question you have, even about your own scripts. Over the years, I've gotten to know a few of the team members on a first name basis. I haven't actually had to contact them in quite some time, but back when I was first learning Pine and getting used to the TradingView platform, I was having to contact them quite frequently to ask questions about things I didn't understand about the platform, and they were always fast to reply, polite, and extremely helpful. In some cases, far more helpful than I expected them to be. They really do take the time to make sure your experience on the platform and with PineScript is as enjoyable as possible. And as I've mentioned several times in this presentation, a huge advantage of PineScript is that it runs on the TradingView servers, so you can turn your PC off. You don't need to leave your computer running in order for your scripts to run. And the coolest thing about this is that TradingView, in my experience, have had zero downtime. There has never been a minute of the day where my script wasn't running or where it failed to generate an alert. Running your scripts on TradingView is basically like having your own free virtual private server, at least for generating alerts. It's a very, very powerful service for us as traders. It basically means that if you are a rules-based systematic trader, you almost don't need to check your charts at all throughout the day because your scripts serve as an infallible second pair of eyes on the markets. In fact, this became a problem for me in my trading where I got very slack with analyzing my charts. There was times there where I didn't perform my top-down analysis, my manual trading analysis, as often as I should have throughout the week because I became too dependent on my scripts alerting me to all of my setups. Now, I personally think that's a bad habit as a trader. I think we should always, no matter how automated our systems become, we should always have our finger on the pulse of the market and be involved in the market and continue to build our experience as traders, our RAS, our reticular activating system, our pattern recognition. That's an important skill to develop as a trader, even if you are heavily dependent on technology and scripts. So that's just a word of warning. PineScript is so awesome that it can actually create bad habits for you as a trader in terms of you getting slack and becoming lazy with your trading process because you become too dependent on your scripts to do the work for you. It's a good problem to have, and that's why I count it as an advantage, but it can be a problem, so be aware of that. Another advantage of PineScript is that it is custom tailored specifically for TradingView charts, meaning there is no fluff, there is no bloat. There is nothing included in the PineScript language that doesn't need to be there. That makes it extremely agile and powerful for analyzing price charts, but as I mentioned in the previous slide about its disadvantages, it also means that we can't build the next killer mobile game in PineScript. But why would you want to do that anyway when there's other languages out there designed specifically for that purpose? PineScript is designed specifically for analyzing charts, and it does it very, very well. And without the need to download complex software or integrated development environments like coding software to help you write your code, all of that's included in your browser in the TradingView platform. The final advantage that I want to include here is the fact that we have easy access to dozens of pre-existing trading indicators and formulas. If it exists and it's popular among traders, it's included in the PineScript language as an inbuilt function or an inbuilt variable. It is very, very rare that you will come across an indicator or an analysis technique that isn't already inbuilt in the PineScript and can't be accessed very simply with very few lines of code. This is what makes it so fast to produce indicator and strategy scripts. The fact that we don't have to manually write out the formulas for many of the popular indicators out there like you would if you were working with Python or any other higher end language. You would either need to find a library that someone else wrote that contains all of that code inbuilt, which comes with its own potential risks and problems and convolution that makes your code even more complex and introduces more things that can break. With PineScript, all of that is seamlessly built into the language. So let's move on to what PineScript's data types are. Now, we'll be working with data types frequently in all of our scripts. There is not going to be a single script that we work with that does not contain some sort of data type. And here is a general list of the main data types we have to work with. I may have missed some here, but if I did miss them, it's because they are exotic data types that are rarely used in your scripts. But these are the core data types that you'll be working with most frequently. First, we have integers, which is basically just whole numbers without a decimal place. Then we have float data types, floating point numbers, which basically just mean decimals. So any number with a decimal place in it is a float data type. And it's called a float because it's short for floating point, and the floating point refers to the decimal, the fact that the point in the number can float around and be anywhere in the number. That's why it's called a float. So integer and float are the only number data types we have to work with. If you're dealing with a whole number without a decimal, it's treated as an integer. If you have a decimal, it's treated as a float. And this has certain implications, which we'll cover later on in the course when we get to practical use cases of using these data types. Next up, we have the string data type, which is basically just text. Any text in your script is treated as a string data type. And string is just short for a string of characters, letters, numbers, and symbols. Next, we have a Boolean data type, which is my favorite word in programming. I don't know why, but maybe it's because I started programming when I was 14 or 15, but I've always found this word to be humorous. It looks funny, it sounds funny, but it's quite simple. It's just a true or false value. And we will be working with booleans quite frequently. Next, we have the color data type. In PineScript, this is treated as its own data type. In most languages, it's not. Normally, it's just a numerical value. In PineScript, it is a data type. And PineScript comes with a whole host of inbuilt colors that we can work with, or you can create your own colors based on any mix of red, green, and blue, and transparency. And you can even use hex colors in your scripts, hexadecimal colors. We'll cover that in its own lesson. But if you're familiar with web development or Photoshop, if you've ever worked with hex colors and you know how they work, you can use them in PineScript the same way you would in any other context. The next data type we have to work with isn't technically its own data type, but it is a collection of data types, and that is arrays. We call these things arrays. So an array is basically a collection or a list of a specific data type. So for example, you could have an array that is full of Boolean values. Maybe you have a Boolean value for every day of the week. Instead of having 7 unique variables in your script, which would take up 7 lines of code, you could treat those Boolean data types or variables as an array and contain them within a list. It's basically just a way to better organize data types that you use in your script, where you have a lot of data types that belong to a certain group. And then finally, I couldn't think of any other data types beyond this list. I'm sure I maybe missed 1 or 2 of the more obscure data types in PineScript, but the final data type I want to mention here is just drawing objects. So drawing objects are treated as their own data type in PineScript. We have several different data types. I haven't listed them all here, but we have lines, we have tables, we have labels. These are all treated as data types in PineScript, but we'll cover arrays and drawing objects much later in the course because they are a little bit more complex than the other 5 data types here. Integers and floats are just numbers. We'll be working with them a lot. Strings are just text. We won't be working with strings very often, but when we get to labels and tables and that sort of thing, we definitely will be. We'll be working with Booleans frequently, true and false values, and we'll obviously be working with color quite a lot. Arrays and drawing objects are not frequently used in your scripts, but we will cover them in future lessons. So that's it for our data types, and that's it for this presentation. In summary, PineScript is a language that is specialized only for TradingView. It only works on TradingView. It was only designed for TradingView, and that's what makes it so powerful because it is integrated directly into the TradingView platform. It's lightweight, but it can perform some fairly complex behaviors and analysis once you get proficient with this language. So don't let the fact that it's lightweight fool you. This is still a very powerful language, in certain contexts at least, relating to price analysis. It's cloud-based, so it runs on TradingView servers, not on your computer. I've mentioned this several times, but it's important that you understand what this means because it is a major feature of PineScript and has some important implications for how your code works. For example, when you set your alerts, TradingView will save a copy of your script onto their servers, and all of your alerts will be generated from that copy of your code, which means if you then update your code and save your script and apply it to your chart, it will not update your alerts. Your alerts will still be generated on the old version of the script, and so to update your alerts to the new script code, you need to delete your alerts and reset them with the new code. That's an example of what it means to be working with a cloud-based language. And because it's cloud-based, there are obviously a handful of resource limitations because it's not running on your computer, it's running on TradingView's computers or servers. And those servers have a limit to what they can handle. And when we all have our scripts running on the same server network, we can run into issues of resource limitations. As I mentioned earlier, it's very rare that you will run into these issues. I personally never have, but we need to be aware that there are some limitations given the fact that we are basically borrowing computational power from TradingView when we run our scripts. And by the way, that is completely free. It doesn't matter if you're on a free TradingView account or the most premium account. The only advantage of upgrading your TradingView account is so that you can set more alerts and access some of the platform features that are locked out to lower tier subscriptions. When it comes to PineScript, everything is free to access, which is a huge advantage of PineScript as well, is that you don't need to pay any money up front before you commit to using the language. The next important thing to mention in the summary is that PineScript is not specifically designed for automated trading, but this can be achieved using third parties. So we can use our alerts to send or relay information to a third party, which can then use that information to execute or manage trades through our broker or exchange if you're dealing with crypto. Now, this approach comes with its own drawbacks and limitations, which we'll cover in the automation section of this course. but that's important to mention. It is possible to automate your trading successfully and profitably through PineScript, but it's a little bit tricky. It's not as intuitive as other languages like MQL might be, where that language was specifically designed to allow you to auto trade. PineScript is designed to analyze charts, but as I mentioned, because we can trigger alerts and send any kind of information we want in those alerts to other websites, other services, we can achieve automated trading through PineScript, which we'll cover much later in the course. And finally, we have 3 types of scripts we can work with in our coding. We have indicator scripts, which is used for creating general indicators and tools. We have our strategy scripts, which are for creating TradingView tester scripts to backtest and execute mock trades, demo trades on price data to see how your strategy might have theoretically performed over historical price data. And then finally, we have libraries, which are used for creating reusable code libraries that can be referenced by other scripts. And that's it for this presentation. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, then you're definitely in the right place. And I look forward to seeing you in the future lessons where we start applying this information in practical and useful applications. I'll speak with you in the next lesson. Take care.